like we never left. It's Double Move Sports. As always, I'm Stef Albiero. I'm here with the Fantasy Phenom, Alex Lotz, and we're talking quarterbacks in this 2022 rookie class. We're also going to dive into some of the free agency and franchise tag news that's been breaking over the last couple of days. We're going to see some things start to trickle in. We're only a few days out from the free agency window, really diving into that as it comes up. But I'm pumped. This is a fun time of year. There's really not much NFL actually happening. There's no play, but it's just a fun time.
Yeah, it's crazy because free agency starts next week. So I'm sure when we come back next week, we're going to have plenty to talk about. But wow, I mean, we pulled it forward this year. Like, we're getting all sorts of action. As we're hitting the record button, like Khalil Mack is getting traded to the LA Chargers. So that division is just getting more and more stacked as we speak. But a lot of big news to talk about. We're going to talk about Aaron Rodgers. We're going to talk about the Russell Wilson trade, the Carson Wentz trade. Like you mentioned, we're getting into these quarterback prospects. And now we've seen the NFL Combine. Now for quarterbacks, it's a little bit, I want to say less important because, you know, with the receivers and the running backs, you get to see the athleticism in the vertical. You get to see the athleticism in the broad jump. You get to see the 40-yard dash time. With quarterbacks, it's a lot more about the throws that they make. The tests aren't quite as important, but we did get to see all these guys play. So if you listen to our running back video, if you listen to our wide receiver video, you know our takes on these guys. Those are starting to take shape now that we've seen the combine, we've seen the test. RIP Kyron Williams and his draft stock. Still hope he can sneak into maybe the 4th or the 5th round. And then guys like Breece Hall are shooting up the board. So we're starting to see things take shape. That's why the Discord is so important, because things are going to continue to evolve as we see pro days, as we get closer to the draft. So the Discord is in the link below. If you're not in there already, join it. Be sure to ask us questions. We're breaking down your dynasty trades. We're breaking down other roster moves you're making, and it's going to be a ton of fun. So Steph, we have a loaded up slate on today's show, but let's start it out with the first big trade of the week. It was Russell Wilson getting traded to the Denver Broncos, an absolute blockbuster trade that seemed to tear down the Aaron Rodgers news, if you will. So I'm gonna see if I can share here. We're gonna look at this trade. So probably pretty tough to see, but we're reading it here from ESPN.com. The Broncos have agreed to trade quarterback Drew Lock, tight end Noah Fant, defensive lineman Shelby Harris, 2 first-round picks. That's the 2022 9th overall and their 2023 pick, 2 second-round picks, and a 5th-round selection for Russell Wilson and a 2022 4th-round pick. So an absolute blockbuster deal sending Russell Wilson to the Denver Broncos. Steph, if you're still with me, I can't tell if you dropped off the stream, but if you're still with me, what do you think of this Russell Wilson move? Well, it sounds like Steph has dropped off. He's going to be coming back, everybody. Don't worry. But I'll go ahead and talk about my first impression of this move. I said it was incredibly surprising. It was exciting. But my first impression is Russell Wilson gets a level up. I mean, you go to a Denver Broncos team that should let him open it up a little bit. We had all the issues in Seattle of like, do we want to let Russ cook? Is this just going to be a run-first team that plays really, really strong defense? And now we're finally going to get to see Russell Wilson's full potential in Denver. He still has good receiving weapons. I don't necessarily think it's an upgrade. I mean, you go from DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett to Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy, who are both great. Tim Patrick is there as well. Hey, we got Steph back. That is good. We got Steph back on the show. But anyway, you go from Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf to Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton. You have Tim Patrick there as well. Obviously, Noah Fant was part of the deal, so you don't get him at tight end, but you have Albert O. You have Javonte Williams. You have a good O-line. That might be one of the things that's the most underrated in this deal is the upgrade in offensive line for Russell Wilson, and hopefully a coaching staff that's going to let him throw the ball. The new head coach did come over from Green Bay, and we saw what Aaron Rodgers has been able to do there. So I think Russell Wilson himself is the first big winner in this trade. And then for the weapons on Denver, it's a level up, obviously, for Cortland Sutton, for Jerry Jeudy. If these are guys that you've had stashed in Dynasty, like for the last 2 years, we've been looking at these rumors with Aaron Rodgers, thinking it was going to be him. So everyone was thinking, hey, I need Sutton, I need Jeudy in case they get the quarterback upgrade. Wasn't Aaron Rodgers, but it is Russell Wilson himself. So if you have been stashing these guys, hoping for that QB upgrade, it is finally your time. And hopefully we'll finally get to see guys like Jeudy and Sutton play to their full potential. We know the talent is there. Now let's see what they can do with a good quarterback in a good offense.
Mic check. Am I back?
I think you're back. I think you're back. If you're watching, let us know if you can hear Stef.
I think we're good now.
Good.
I think we're good now. But yes, I've been dying to get these Russell Wilson takes off. What's up, Phil? Dude, shout out to everybody who's in a Dynasty league with us. Join that Discord channel if you want to compete with us. Put your money where your mouth is. We'll do the same. But diving into – thank you, Phil, for confirming that everything's working. Sorry for the technical difficulties. What's crazy to see is that Seattle was dead last in total teams run per game last year and dead last in pass attempts per game last year. So now the stage is set for Russell Wilson to actually cook. No more Pete Carroll, no more old school mentality to, hey, we're gonna establish the run here. It's like, no, Russell Wilson knows what he's doing by going to Denver. He knows the clout. He knows the leverage that he has going to be the guy. And the fact that the Denver Broncos paid as much as they did, which honestly I think it was kind of a steal, what they had to pay. But the training wheels are going to come off for Russell Wilson. And that's what's so exciting about this now. I am a Russell Wilson holder in multiple Superflex Dynasty leagues. I'm so excited. I'm not trying to say I'm going to sell high off of the trade hype. I'm just excited to hold and let one of the most efficient quarterbacks that we've seen in this era go out and go to a team where he's not going to be in the bottom half of the league in pass attempts. Hopefully. And he's not going to, just like Tom Brady when he goes to Tampa, just like Aaron Rodgers coming back to Green Bay. Like, these guys want to put themselves in winning positions. Denver has a contender level defense. They have this entire time. Like, we're seeing them go toe-to-toe with Teddy Bridgewater at quarterback, with Drew Lock at quarterback, with the Chiefs at times, with the Chargers at times, with the Raiders at times in the division, just because that defense is so stacked. And we're already seeing Von Miller potentially coming back, dropping some tidbits on his social media that he wants to come back to Denver. So looks like they're going all in. The Denver Broncos are to try to win a championship now that they do have Russell Wilson. I love this move for Russell Wilson's fantasy value. And obviously all the weapons take a bump. There's really nowhere else to go for Javonte Williams as far as his dynasty value. He's already top 5 running back. Mm-hmm. And part of that ceiling was, hey, Melvin Gordon might not be coming back. Maybe they get an Aaron Rodgers to come in and free agency. Like, those things are happening, right? That was kind of baked into his ADP already. We can get into some of the values in Dynasty right now for Javonte Williams. I have sold him in a deal where I got back Cam Akers and some other pieces, some draft capital. I would love to dive into that a little bit at the end of today's show. But, Alex, I think one of the biggest questions here is now what happens for DK and Lockett. There's rumors that Lockett is going to get traded. It would make sense for an older receiver. Now that a team's going full rebuild, they want to get his cap hit off their books. He served his time in Seattle. Potentially going to go somewhere else. We see time and time again, though, that all these trade rumors come up and nothing really happens. So I kind of believe it when I see it, but you would expect if they really are going full rebuild that Lockett's going to go somewhere else. What happens to DK, though? I still have him as a top 12 name, but I'm curious to see where you have him in Dynasty.
Yeah, it's a big hit for both. And I honestly think if you have DK, if you have Lockett, this is the worst time you could possibly sell them in any situation. Like, if you are a contender and you have Tyler Lockett, it doesn't make sense to sell him right now because you're probably not going to get a lot for him. And if you have DK, whether you're in a rebuild, whether you're in you're contending, whatever it is, like, his value has been suppressed. Like, we posted some off the cuff Dynasty rankings in our Discord. We're working on, fingers crossed, nothing official yet, but we're working on maintaining Dynasty rankings that we'll have available in our Discord. So if you're not in there, be sure to join. But I moved DK down. He's my number 11 receiver right now in Dynasty. Before this move, I'd probably say he was around 5 or 6. So he's moved down temporarily. Now, if we see some direction, we see them bring on a better quarterback, he will move back up a little bit. But until that happens, he is currently at number 11. So I think it's the worst time to sell. Values are suppressed. And with Bobby Wagner also being cut on the defensive side of the ball, I think that's actually very, very telling for Seattle's direction, just because with Bobby Wagner being cut, that tells me they're probably gearing towards the rebuild side of things rather than trying to bring in a Band-Aid quarterback for the time being. So I actually expect Tyler Lockett to get moved. I think his contract makes him tough to cut. So we'll see what happens. But right now, I would just hold on because chances are they're not going to roll into the season with only Geno Smith and Drew Lock. They're likely going to bring on a rookie or do something which should at least help the value for DK and Lockett a little bit.
And if you're hitting waiver wires in deep Superflex Dynasty leagues, go ahead and stash Geno Smith and Drew Lock because they're probably sitting out there and you can get them for free if you need a QB. Same thing we had with Taylor Heineke back in the day. It's like he's behind a volatile starter, a guy that they're not really committed to. We don't know what's going to happen as far as maybe if they do draft Malik Willis, does he start right away? There will be weeks where either Drew Lock or Geno Smith, whoever is that starter as we roll into the 2022 season, will at least be a starting quarterback in the league that you can slide into a super flex spot, especially in deep dynasty leagues. So I'm going to throw that out there, just quick little stash right off the waiver wire.
Absolutely. Steph, one more thing I want to throw out there with this trade. We'll talk about Wentz. We won't talk as much about the Wentz trade. Not quite as groundbreaking as this Russell Wilson move, but I want to throw out a sneaky pickup after this trade, and it's for the deepest of dynasty leagues. But Dwayne Estridge, man, I mean, he had some hype coming out of the draft, got the second round draft capital from Seattle. So now obviously Russell Wilson leaving, the quarterback situation gets worse, but right now is the time. Like Tyler Lockett, we're saying he could get traded if they decide to go full rebuild and Tyler Lockett does get moved. They could be moving forward this season with DK Metcalf and Dwayne Estridge, and even Dwayne Estridge with a worse quarterback in a number 2 role, I think is much more valuable than as the number 3 or whatever he was last year, like the 3B in Seattle. So if Estridge is going to have a shot, this is the kind of thing that needed to happen. We talked last offseason about Estridge saying, hey, for him to have a chance, like DK's pretty locked in Seattle. Tyler Lockett just signed a new contract. Like what could happen for Estridge to get a chance? And if Lockett does get traded, that would be that opportunity for him. So just a deep name to keep an eye on. He could be, I picked him up on a waiver wire in one of my leagues. I think yours truly actually dropped him for me a couple weeks ago, Steph, but that's just how it be sometimes. Well, let's move on to Carson Wentz. My Colts trade Carson Wentz to the Washington Commanders. This one's not really surprising that Wentz got moved. We could see the writing on the wall. I think the haul that they got back for him is interesting. 2 third-round picks, one that can turn into a second. And Washington is taking on Wentz's full contract. So I think the Colts actually did decent in this deal. They're going to clear up a bunch of cap space, but now they have a hole at quarterback. So Steph, first impressions of the Wentz trade. As a Colts fan, I'll say I was a little bit disappointed. Now that Rodgers and Wilson were off the market, I'm like, where are we going to go? That's a clear upgrade from Carson Wentz. Like Jimmy G, I think is kind of a lateral move. Kirk Cousins seems unlikely right now that he's going to get moved, but we'll see. We've certainly seen crazier things happen. But Steph, what's your first impression of the Carson Wentz move? What do you think it means for the Colts and then the Washington football team? Washington Commanders, still getting used to that one. What does it mean for them and their pieces?
It was a lateral move in all ways from a fantasy football perspective. Both these teams, the Colts and the Washington now Commanders, I still miss the Washington football team name. That was just so fun. But they're very similar in terms of pace of play. They're very similar in terms of run to pass ratio. Washington football team 46 to 53 run pass ratio. The Colts 48 to 51 run pass ratio. So they are teams that pass the ball more than they do run it, which is surprising considering the Colts have Jonathan Taylor, Nyheim Hines. They had Marlon Mack, who was getting on the field last year in some scenarios, and they were still airing the ball out with Wentz. So I think what this tells us is that Washington sees an opening to make the playoffs in a soft NFC East. They said, look, we just need a guy who's an upgrade from Ryan Fitzpatrick, a guy who's an upgrade from Taylor Heineke to give us that playoff push. We can sneak in kind of like the Eagles did just this past season with Jalen Hurts. So it was more of a, like, let's get some stability in a really soft conference where you have questions about Daniel Jones. The Cowboys are probably going to win the division every year, but they always seem to bust her out at some point. And then, with the Eagles, who knows, right? They're just such a overall raw offense that with a team with a loaded defense, with some really stud players like Chase Young, like Terry McLaurin, even Antonio Gibson. But it doesn't really change much for me from the values that I had on these players. Gibson is still a running back I'm extremely high on, a RB1 in dynasty leagues. He was top 5 in carries last year. He's getting the volume. J.D. McKissick is now a year older, coming off of injury. I love the flash that we saw from Antonio Gibson in the passing game. So he's still a guy I'm just as high on, if not higher, now that there is actually some quote-unquote stability to the offense. I don't know how stable Wentz is, but he's definitely going to be more stable than what they had in Washington last year. And then from the Colts, I don't really know what direction they're going to go here. It feels like a ripe landing spot for a Jameis Winston, a Teddy Bridgewater, maybe even Ryan Fitzpatrick, a Mitchell Trubisky. I'd love to see Marcus Mariota get another chance to start. We never saw Mariota like crumble, and he's was relegated to a backup. What did he do wrong, really? Other than make the playoffs every year of his career and put up numbers on the ground. Like he got a tough deal. Mariota did. So I'd love him to be a starter again. And, Trubisky's a guy that showed flashes at times. We would love him in fantasy because he is a rushing QB, and he's taken a pretty poor Chicago Bears offense to the playoffs. So he's not a nothing at quarterback. We'll definitely take a Mariota, a Trubisky, or even a Jimmy G over like a Cam Newton and Andy Dalton. Running it back with Jacoby Brissett would be really scary as a Colts fan. So, Alex, what do you think they do as the Colts homer here at DMS?
Yeah, you threw out the big options. I think the most likely scenario, it's not one I'm certainly thrilled about, is Jimmy Garoppolo. If they're going to try to upgrade from Carson Wentz, Jimmy G is the one with the most experience, who's won the most games. So, yeah, Lance, obviously and honestly, Kirk Cousins is the one name that I would be excited about as a Colts fan, because I think he's not necessarily an elite quarterback, but he still is a clear upgrade to Carson Wentz. He's good enough with that team to win some games. So Kirk is the one I want, but I just don't know how realistic that is. But of the names you mentioned, Steph, I think Mariota is certainly the most interesting. I don't want Mitch Trubisky. Please don't do that to me. Please don't. And the one sleeper name that you didn't mention, and I've been talking about him, is Gardner Minshew, man. Gardner Minshew, when he's had the opportunity, has been nothing short of spectacular. Not spectacular. He's been solid, I should say. In
spectacular for his standards, for backup sixth round quarterback standards. Exactly. He has been spectacular.
In Jacksonville, he put up decent numbers. He was always gritty. He could actually win some games. He didn't have a lot of pieces around him as well. His passer rating was fantastic. And then in his opportunities with Philly, he came in a couple times for Jalen Hurts and played phenomenally, protected the ball, high completion percentage. So everything we've seen from Gardner Minshew has been great. I'd love to see him get a chance as well. Who knows? Maybe you sign one of the free agents. You sign a Mariota or a Trubisky. You make a move and you bring in a Gardner Minshew and you let these guys battle it out and you give yourself some options. I don't mind doing that either, but I think you hit the nail on the head from a fantasy perspective. It brings stability to Washington, but I'm not, tiering these guys up into the next level tier, like a McLaurin, Antonio Gibson. And then for the Colts, I'll move some guys down very, very temporarily, but the only reason I don't move them down too far like I do with DK Metcalf is because with the Colts, we know the direction. Like, we know they're going to bring in somebody, and it's not going to be Jacob Eason heading into next season. But Steph, I think it's time to get to the main event. We're 18 minutes in, and it's time to talk about some rookie quarterbacks. We've got a lot of interesting ones this year. And it's a class that's gotten a lot of hate, but I think as we're getting closer and closer to the NFL draft, people are starting to come around on these guys, as we typically do. The draft capital has gone from, there might not be any in the first round, to now it's like we could see 3, 4, even 5 quarterbacks in the first round. It happens every single year. And Steph, the first guy we're going to talk about is Malik Willis. So one thing we're going to do here on DMS, look, full transparency, you guys, we're always trying to level up. We're always trying to get better at what we do. So part of that comes, with these live streams, we want to up the quality for you guys. So we're going to try to bring in some highlights as we talk through these players. Malik Willis is up first. So if this is just like incredibly grainy, terrible video quality, like, let us know in the comments and we will take it down. But if it looks good, we'll keep this thing rolling and we'll watch some Willis while we talk about it. Look at that. I mean, this dude's amazing. Yeah, I'm just kidding. I'm going to get distracted watching these highlights. So Lance with the hot take saying, don't be surprised if the Lions take him at 2. But Steph, talking about Malik Willis, this is the quarterback that I feel like is getting the most hype right now in this class. He is projected right now to go in the top 10, 6'1", about 220 pounds. He'll be 23 years old this season. So age, he's not like one of these super young guys, but he's not super old either. He went to Auburn for 2 years, then he transferred to Liberty for his final 2 seasons. In 2021, he was one of these hybrid passer runners. You see on this highlight right here, like, he can run with the football, and he's definitely more of a Jalen Hurts style runner. I mean, size-wise, they're almost the same, almost like they're fast and they've got some agility, but they can, like, run you over as well if they need to. They're not a Lamar Jackson or a Kyler Murray, like, going to avoid all contact kind of guy. And at Liberty, I mean, 2,800 pass yards, 27 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, 61% completion percentage. So definitely a bit raw as a passer. But the rushing is what we're excited about. 878 rushing yards, 13 rushing touchdowns at Liberty last season. His arm strength is something that's been really impressive at the Senior Bowl and at the Combine. That's something that's contributing to his rise up these draft boards. There's been nothing but good things to say from him out of team interviews as well. There was that clip that went viral in Indy of him helping like a homeless person on the street in his free time at the Combine. So from a character perspective, everything has been great with Malik Willis. The arm strength is impressive, and that's something we saw from raw passers like Josh Allen coming out of college as well. And the draft capital should be there as well. So he's going to be everything we love for fantasy, even if he's not a great NFL quarterback. I think you're going to get that rookie contract amount of time where he is a good fantasy football asset. So with Malik Willis, I think he is honestly a Jalen Hurts comp. It's the easy comp, but I think Jalen Hurts is almost like, I think his floor is closer to a Jalen Hurts and his ceiling is closer to a Josh Allen type of guy. And I know that's a bit of a hot take, but Josh Allen had the same concerns coming out of college, smaller school, really strong arm, not a high completion percentage and a raw passer. And he was a good runner as well. And he developed into a great NFL quarterback, obviously. And now he's one of those runners that can score a lot of touchdowns. He's not ripping off 80-yard runs, but he can truck a guy and get a first down. And that's what Malik Willis is to me. So I know, we were talking about the Jalen Hurts comp earlier today, and I said he was Jalen Hurts plus. You said he was Jalen Hurts minus. So I'm really excited to see what you have to say about Malik Willis. But he's my QB1 right now in this class. And I think the draft capital is going to back him up. And he's someone I'm going to be targeting everywhere in these Superflex leagues.
Yeah, you have to. You have to. Now, the debate that's really happening for these Dynasty rookie drafts, especially Superflex, is are we going Malik Willis or Breece Hall? To me, you're still going Breece Hall because he's a much safer prospect. Where we can comp Trey Lance and Malik Willis is the fact that they're small school guys. They didn't have a ton of playing time at these small schools, but what we did see against soft competition was them go nuclear, put up video game numbers. I comp Malik Willis from his dynasty value to a poor man's Trey Lance. So I think you have to take him 102 in Superflex just because of the upside. Maybe feel good at quarterback with your roster. Just trade back. Right? There's the big four wide receivers from Burks, Wilson, London, and Jameson Williams. Another guy we really like. We've talked about them on the Wide Receiver Prospect Show. Can't wait once we get to the draft to really dive into these wide receivers. We also, if you feel good at quarterback, you can just trade back and get a Kenneth Walker or an Isaiah Spiller in the mid to late first. That's where their ADPs are right now in Dynasty Superflex mocks. But what blows my mind when we make those Jalen Hurts comparisons, and full disclosure, I am a Jalen Hurts. I would say I'm borderline truther. I think anybody who's fading him because, he might not be a starter in Philly in 2023, I will gladly take the discount on that line of thinking because I do think he will be the starter. He already got them to the playoffs in his second year, and they moved on from Doug Peterson and installed Jalen Hurts as the guy. Moved on from Carson Wentz. That era is over. This is now the Jalen Hurts era in Philly. That's just my take on things. I know a lot of people disagree. I hope that he can see that ascension that we saw. We'll keep going back to Josh Allen as the template for this, but a guy who has all the tools that hopefully can continue to develop as a passer, more efficiency, smarter decisions, those type of things, and hopefully they can put better weapons from Jalen Hurts. But it blows my mind that Jalen Hurts also had video game level numbers against SEC competition, against Big Ten competition, it's Oklahoma, Big Ten, or Big 12. I always get them mixed up. You can check that for me. But essentially at Alabama against SEC competition, even as a freshman, 18-year-old freshman in the SEC, threw for almost 3,000 yards, 954 rushing yards, 23-9 touchdown to interception ratio. Now, I know Alabama has better weapons than everybody else out there, but it just blows my mind time and time again how Jalen Hurts fell to the second round. We even saw him switch teams, go to a whole new system, and have over 1,200, almost 1,300 rushing yards and almost 4,000 passing yards as a senior. So I feel like Hurts is getting faded just because of him getting sat for Tua on the biggest stage. I hate the narrative, and it feels like this year, because the quarterback class is so weak, a lot of these guys are getting pushed up the draft boards. I don't think if Malik Willis came out last year, he would be in this conversation at all. He would be a late round 2 name, right? So the lack of depth of the position actually plays a lot into the draft capital. But what we know is that if the NFL believes in these guys, we have to believe. And I kind of view it as trying to beat the stock market, right? If you just invest in an index fund that just covers the market, you're going to be safe. Index funds and draft capital are the same thing. If we just draft guys based off of their draft capital in the NFL draft, that's going to do pretty well for us for the most part. For the most part. Now, it's not perfect. The NFL whips on a lot of guys. Shout out to the Raiders for drafting these undersized speedsters everywhere and ruining draft capital. Same thing for the Giants. But but I do feel like Malik Willis is getting, and really all these quarterbacks that we're going to talk about today are getting inflated. Part of that is the pre-draft hype that's going on. But I think part of that too is just the lack of depth in this class. But we know at worst, Willis is going to have the rushing upside. Even if he stinks for a team, we see he can ball. Even look at like Jalen Hurts' rookie year. Like, as with second-round draft capital and a pretty bad rookie year, he was still getting pretty hyped up in dynasty circles. And we saw flashes of the upside from a rushing perspective. So Malik Willis could just be Jalen Hurts with better draft capital from a small school. I tend to still lean Jalen Hurts, though, because I'm a Jalen Hurts believer. It's just so weird to me that we're talking Malik Willis as a top 15 name, getting better draft capital than a guy who had better numbers against better competition and went in the second round.
Yeah, it's interesting. And the reason you're right. I mean, I don't know if Willis would be a late second round name in last year's class, but I think there's a chance he's in round 2 and he's the 6th quarterback off the board for sure. So with Willis, we have to take that with a grain of salt. But what makes him different from if we're talking about our dynasty leagues, the draft capital is important, but the reason I like Willis so much is just because of that rushing upside. We see it with Jalen Hurts. Like, his completion percentage is hovering around 60% for his career in the NFL. His pass rating hasn't been great. He's just had that rushing cheat code upside. Stef, you'll be the first one to say he hasn't had the weapons. I get it. But if Willis can come in and even be a poor man's Jalen Hurts and he's rushing for 80 yards a game, from a fantasy football perspective, he could still have top 5 seasons. I mean, Jalen Hurts, before he missed time this year, was QB1. And he probably isn't a top 12, 15 NFL quarterback right now. So the reason I like Willis is because he's going to get drafted into a situation in the first round where he's going to have a rookie contract, at least 4 years, and he is going to give you that rushing upside. And even if he struggles, he should still be able to give you top 10 performances in fantasy football. But let's move on. And before we do move on, I want to say there is a tier break for me in this class. Like, it is right now, just from in these super flex leagues, I want Malik Willis at the quarterback spot. And then there's a drop off. I don't think that Corral, I don't think Kenny Pickett, I don't think Sam Howell are in the same tier right now. And it all comes back to that rushing upside. So, Steph, let's move on to our next guy. We're going to talk about Kenny Pickett, a very, very interesting prospect in this class. And his story is actually really, really interesting. But first, let me get some Kenny Pickett hype up on the screen for us here. We'll get some of these highlights going. But Pickett, I didn't realize how interesting his story was. Kenny Pickett at Pitt actually looked like his career was going to be over. He was a senior in 2020, and he finished the year like 13 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, a very pedestrian season, 61% completion percentage. So, like, Kenny Pickett was a solid college quarterback, a game manager, but wasn't like breaking the game in any way. And he even took part in senior day that year. It looked like his playing days were over. And then all of a sudden, the NCAA gives players an extra year of eligibility because of COVID. Kenny Pickett takes advantage of it. He decides to come back. And as a fifth-year senior, he balls out for 4,300 yards, 42 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, 67% completion percentage. He also ran for 230-something odd yards and 5 touchdowns. So Kenny Pickett, super average college quarterback at a mid-tier, probably a slightly below average Power 5 school in Pitt, all of a sudden comes out of nowhere and just lights the world on fire in this class. So for as good as he was in 2021, it makes you wonder, like, what happened? Like, did he just step up and say it's all or nothing this season? Or was there better receiver play? Did he just take a huge step forward in his development? And there's a lot to like about Kenny Pickett, but it is weird that it took him 5 years to get there. When I look at Pickett as a prospect, one of the reasons he is such a tier down for me from a guy like Malik Willis is just thinking about the upside, because Kenny Pickett is from what we saw this past season, that's what we're going to grade him off of. He's a really good quarterback. He's got good enough arm strength. He's accurate. He's mobile. We mentioned the 200 plus rush yards and 5 touchdowns, had some breakaway runs this season as well, but he's just sound at everything. And he's not really elite at anything. So when I think about Kenny Pickett and what that translates to in the NFL, I think of a Derek Carr type guy as his upside, someone who can be a franchise quarterback for a long time. In fantasy, if he hits, he's going to give you some good streaming weeks and good matchups. He can certainly spread the ball around and sling it down the field. But I don't know that he's ever going to give you that game-breaking upside to be a QB1, your first quarterback on your roster in a Superflex league. So I think Derek Carr is the comp for me. Pickett is similar in size as well, 6'3", 220. And one more interesting fact about Pickett, I was shocked to learn that he's the same age as Justin Herbert. Herbert turned, I think today is actually Justin Herbert's birthday, because I was looking into this earlier. So Justin, if you're watching, happy birthday. Happy 24. But Kenny Pickett, man, he's going to be 24 in like 3 months. So they're the same age. And it was that 5th year that did it for him. But it's just weird that, we're in this time vortex where he's already going to be 24 coming out as a rookie. So just one more thing to consider with Pickett when we're evaluating him as a prospect. It's not going to bury him on my list just because, enter my rankings, just because, these quarterbacks, we see him play till 35, 37, 40. If you're Tom Brady, 44 years old. So that doesn't do too much for me, but it did take him a little bit longer to develop, which is just crazy that 5th year and that COVID eligibility really propelled him into a guy that's probably going to be a first-round draft pick.
Yeah, I think and my feeling just on quarterback values in general and why you still have to take some of these QBs. And let me just be fully honest here. I'm going to let the draft capital, I have takes on these quarterbacks. I have my thoughts. I have my opinions, but I'm just going to let the NFL tell me what they believe about these players. They get to have interviews. They get to give them the Wonderlic test. They have guys that are getting paid millions of dollars to literally sit there and watch every single film piece that they can on these players. So I'm going to trust that at the end of the day. But even with a guy who comes out and completely busts, that isn't even like a highly sought after prospect, I think of Zach Wilson. Like Zach Wilson just went 6th round in a Superflex Dynasty startup that you and I are in. The value is there, even if these guys are terrible their first year. What happens if we see Kenny Pickett go through what he went through in college again? What if it takes him 2, 3, 4, 5 years to get to that level where he is a consistent starter? We could see him in a Baker Mayfield-esque situation where we don't know if he's really going to be the answer for his organization long-term. But that's really all we have to look at with these guys. You look at Justin Herbert, he didn't really have huge numbers in college. Now, part of that was the system that he was in at Oregon, but and again, like we were fading Justin Herbert. Alex, we've talked about the infamous trade where you traded away Justin Herbert right before the season for some draft capital. It happens. Nobody was on Justin Herbert. And so at this point, it's pretty clear, it's pretty apparent that whether it's NFL evaluators, whether it's fantasy aficionados, nobody knows with these quarterbacks. And that's why you have to take them. But they also get such value insulation because they're given long leashes with high-end draft capital. We're seeing Zach Wilson still going highly when he was honestly to me, a bad prospect coming out. People were going nuts over some sidearm throws. It's like, it was just silly to me why he was getting propped up so highly and why the Jets were keying in on him that early in the draft over a Mac Jones. It just made no sense, but that's what we have to trust on the field. It's really hard to project with these guys. I do like the skill set of Kenny Pickett that he showed that senior year, but the question just is, what Kenny Pickett are we getting? Are we getting those first 3-4 years? I know he redshirted his freshman year. So are we getting that, or are we getting that super senior season from Kenny Pickett where he goes nuclear? Now, he did have some stud weaponry in Pitt, and the ACC was wide open. So that could have played into a little bit where the level of competition last year suffered a little bit. We had Clemson on a down year. We had a lot of teams from the ACC on down years. Florida State's been a dumpster fire. Louisville bottomed out. There's been a lot of just bad production in the ACC where like even UNC lost half their offense to the NFL. They look terrible, and we'll dive into Sam Howell here in a minute. But I think part of it too was just it was a wide open ACC that Kenny Pickett could really show out against. And again, kind of going back to the Malik Willis thing, like he's going to go higher because this class is so weak. And so then it just becomes the value game. The economics for these teams in the draft are like, if we're going to get a quarterback, we know there's other teams that need quarterbacks. We might as well take this guy early. Let's go get our guy. But this is a guy that I'm going to be looking at back of the first round in Superflex, unless he just goes to a smash landing spot. I think the best ones are going to be Pittsburgh, Tampa Bay, maybe New Orleans, maybe even Carolina. Like, those are the ones that'd be really exciting for him to see, where we know he's going to be a starter from day one. Even if he does bust her out a la Zach Wilson, we know his value is not going to crater compared to a running back like a Trent Richardson. We had people, even with Jonathan Taylor, one of the best running back prospects that we've seen, halfway through a poor rookie year, people were out on him completely, and I was able to trade Ronald Jones for him in a deal. Like, quarterback is such a high-value position, and these guys have such long leashes that, and this goes for all the guys that we're going to talk about. I'm just kind of bringing it up here for this Pickett take because he doesn't have that Konami code rushing upside. But I do like the tools. I like what we saw in that super senior season from Kenny Pickett. There's just a lot of question marks about who is he really as a player. Why did it take him so long to break out?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing to consider, like you mentioned this a little bit, he had Jordan Addison, who's a stud wide receiver. Who knows, maybe in next year's draft, we'll see Jordan Addison get drafted to wherever Kenny Pickett goes, like we saw out of Burrow and Jamar Chase. But Pitt was in a lot of shootouts this year. I mean, that ACC, especially that mid-tier, bottom tier of the ACC, man, those defenses were terrible. They played against some other teams that had some quarterbacks that could ball out too. So, yeah, a lot of his numbers could be inflated from that. But, Steph, let's go ahead and move on to our next guy. Matt Corral from Ole Miss. We'll get his highlights up on the screen rolling for us here. But Corral really had a breakout season in 2020. There were some high hopes for him coming into 2021. I'd say he had a good, not a great season in 2021. His 2020 was certainly better. Back in 2020, 300 yards a game, 3 touchdowns a game, 71% completion percentage. And then this year he goes to, 13 games this year versus 10 games last year, but same amount of yards in 3 more games. He had a 20 touchdown to 5 interception, touchdown to interception ratio, which was a little bit better. He took care of the ball a little bit more. He battled some injuries, and he had a 67% completion percentage. So 2021 was no sham for Matt Corral, but I think a lot of people wanted him to take a step forward, especially with some of the athletic receivers Ole Miss had. And it seems like he was fairly stagnant. But one thing I love about Corral, and you're seeing it here on these highlights, this dude's mobile. He's way more mobile than people give him credit for. And part of the reason he was banged up so much is because he's such a tough guy. Like, this guy's not afraid to lower his shoulder and take a hit. I'm sure these NFL scouts are going to tell him to learn how to slide, maybe bring in some former baseball players to have some tutorials with him. But 500 plus rushing yards in 2 straight seasons for Matt Corral. So you think about the mobility. He's not giving you Jalen Hurts level mobility, Lamar Jackson. He's more of like a Patrick Mahomes level mobility. Like, he can run it if he needs to. I think at the NFL level, he'll run it when he needs to. But you're not going to design a ton of runs for this guy as your franchise quarterback in the league. He did have some designed runs in college, but I don't expect that moving forward. But he should be able to give you some good mobility on the ground, which is another reason I like him. Maybe like a Dak Prescott level mobility. So this guy's another quarterback that's projected in the first this year. I'm starting to like him more than Kenny Pickett as a prospect. I think initially for me, it was Willis, Pickett, and then Matt Corral. Matt Corral, I think, has jumped Pickett for me just because of what he can do with his legs and a little bit bigger sample size at the college level against high-level competition in the SEC. I trust that a little bit more. So I like his film a lot. I mean, if you watch him, I watched a lot of the Ole Miss games as well this past season. Their opener was against Louisville, and Matt Corral absolutely torched Louisville because you and I are both Cardinal guys. But Corral's a good prospect. I think there's some risk involved just because of how tenacious he is and how wild he can be on the field sometimes. But at 6'2", 215, he's not, the tallest guy, doesn't have supreme NFL size, but he's big enough to get it done, and he's a tough player. And I think he's one of these guys that's going to come out there and give it all every single week. Like, he is as tough as nails. Like, I think I've said the word toughness at least 4 or 5 times as I've been talking about him, because when you watch him play, that's one of the things that just comes away from his game. So I think he's going to work to get better. It's tough to know that. And you said it about the scouts. Like, they're the ones in the meetings with these guys. They're the ones doing the Wonderlic test. They're the ones talking to college coaches and getting the full rundown on these guys. But from what I can see from this kid, it looks like he's going to come out and be a competitor from day one, which is certainly something you like to see. Obviously, I'd rather have arm strength, arm talent, arm accuracy, and quickness over, toughness or competitiveness. But it's definitely something that can't be ignored when you just watch his film and watch this guy play.
That's what the NFL values as well. There's 2 types of quarterback prospects that we want to invest in Dynasty. And the first one is the tools guy, right? The electric rusher with the big arm. That's the Malik Willis profile.
Yes.
That's why Trey Lance is borderline untouchable in Superflex Dynasty leagues right now. I've been offering egregious overpays for Trey Lance, and I'm still getting told no. So he's just the guy that's almost unattainable because the guys who drafted him want to see what that upside is because everyone wants that next Josh Allen. Josh Allen is a prime example of this type of player. Jalen Hurts fits in this profile as well. Lamar Jackson, who slipped to the back of the first round. Typically, there's a really low hit rate for quarterbacks that don't get taken in the top 10. Lamar Jackson put that narrative to the side. He beat the odds and is now one of the big five at the quarterback position in fantasy football. So that's the first profile, the tools players that can develop. They might struggle a little bit starting out the gate, but they give you that insulated fantasy value with the rushing and the high yards per pass attempt. The other profile we look at are the hyper efficient college prospects. We're talking about the Mac Jones, the Joe Burrows, the Tuas, right? The Baker Mayfields, these hyper efficient guys, high completion percentage, great yards per attempt. They're not throwing a lot of interceptions. They're making smart decisions, and the NFL values them as top 5, top 10, top 15 NFL draft talents, which is probably what we're talking about here with a Kenny Pickett and a Matt Corral. I'm with you on Corral over Pickett because he showed much better efficiency. He had a 95th percentile college quarterback rating, and his best season, that 2020 season, he had a 94th percentile yards per attempt on his throws. So he had over 10 yards per attempt. That's fantastic to see. He has a top percentile breakout age. There's really not a ton of correlation between breakout age with quarterback prospects, but I think it is worth throwing out there. When you see a guy produce earlier, it's always better to see than a guy that takes a while to develop. Shows they have some natural talent, natural ability that they bring to their game. But that's why I like Corral. He just had more efficiency through the air throughout his entire college career. Pickett and Corral were both guys that stayed in college all 4 years. No early declares here. Same for Malik Willis, which is disappointing to see. The only early declare that we have with these top 5 quarterbacks is Sam Howell, who we'll dive into in a second. But I'm with you on Corral because I think he fits much more of that efficiency profile. He fits that Baker Mayfield profile where he's scrappy with what he can do, making plays off script. He's scrappy. When he needs to get the first down, he can rush for 10 yards if he needs to. And he's efficient as a passer. So that's the profile he fits into. I don't really see Pickett necessarily fitting into either one, even though he did have that gunslinger season in 2021. So just comparing those two guys, give me Corral. And I think the fantasy community's in on that take. We'll see if the NFL agrees. I'm guessing no, where I'm seeing the mock drafts.
I agree. I think from a fantasy perspective, you got to like Corral. And I think, honestly, from a fantasy perspective, you have to like this next guy we're going to talk about, Sam Howell. Out of UNC, it's going to be interesting to see where he goes in the draft. Again, we have to let draft capital impact our decisions a little bit, but from a fantasy football perspective, not necessarily like we saw last year, Mac Jones come out and be a great NFL quarterback. Like, there's no doubt of all the rookie quarterbacks, Mac Jones was the best for the NFL, but give me a Justin Fields who struggled over Mac Jones all day from a fantasy football perspective in my dynasty leagues, just because I know the upside he brings with his legs. You don't have to be a prolific NFL passer to bring fantasy football value, especially in these super flex leagues. So Sam Howell, this next guy we're going to talk about, I think certainly fits that bill as someone who I don't know if the NFL is going to believe in him, but from a fantasy football perspective, this is a guy that I think I will end up having above Kenny Pickett as well. And the draft capital will dictate just how those tiers break down. But when we look at Sam Howell, I mean, this dude balled out all 3 years as a starter at UNC. And it's actually really, really interesting. So he's 6'1", 6'2", 220. I thought he was bigger than 220 because when I watch him play, he just as a runner, he just will absolutely truck people, and he is thick in a good way for a quarterback. Like, he's got size. He's not going to get knocked around. But Sam Howell, what's so interesting about him, at age 19 at UNC, comes out for 3,600 yards, 38 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions. Like, incredible at age 19 as a freshman at UNC. Then his sophomore year, he goes for a similar season, 3,500 yards, 30 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions. And then this last season, he loses half of his offense with guys like, Michael Carter, Javonte Williams, De'Ami Brown, I think, as well from UNC, right?
Daz Newsome.
He loses his entire offense, and he has his worst year statistically at the college level, but he still goes for 3,000 yards, 24 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. But the interesting thing that happened last season in 2021 as a junior for Sam Howell is his rushing yards went up to 828 yards. He went from 35 rushing yards as a freshman to 146 to last season when he had nobody to throw the ball to except Downs. I don't know his first name, but Downs. Keep an eye on him. He was a great wide receiver for UNC this year. But other than that, their offense was essentially nothing. So I think he just had to take the offense under control. He had to run the ball more, and he was really, really good at it. So when I watch Sam Howell play, the reason I like him for fantasy football, we've seen the tools. We've seen the arm strength. We've seen him push the ball downfield, and we've also seen him do it with his legs on the ground, not only in a yards perspective, but touchdowns as well. So Sam Howell is one of these guys that I think could get to the NFL level. And yes, he's a little bit more raw as a prospect. I know we use that term a lot when we're talking about these guys, but the range of outcomes for him is huge for me. And I think he is a risky prospect. But when we talk about the range of outcomes and the upside, that's what I'm looking for in a guy like Sam Howell. And I think he could come. This is going to be kind of a hot take here, Steph, but I think on the spectrum of what his value could be, he could be anywhere from a Mitch Trubisky at the lowest. Like, comes out, we have high expectations. We want him to get a little bit more refined as a passer, a big guy who can run as well, and he just doesn't pan out. I think that's the downside for a guy like Sam Howell. But I think the upside is closer to a Josh Allen. No, he doesn't have the size of a Josh Allen, but if he can come out and get these quarterback coaches, get these offensive coordinators working with him, get him refined as a passer with his mechanics, draw up a system that really crafts his game and highlights the things that he's good at and minimizes the things that he is bad at, I think Sam Howell could be a really good NFL quarterback. Like, anytime you say the upside is Josh Allen, who's the QB1 in Dynasty right now, I think that is a little bit rich. So maybe Josh Allen minus is the upside for Sam Howell. But I think the tools are there. He's shown it to us at the college levels, 3 straight seasons. He's done it with his arm, a 38 touchdown, 7 interception season. He's done it with his legs last season with 828 yards on the ground without a lot of weapons around him. So for Sam Howell, I think the sky's the limit, and the upside alone is why I think I'm going to end up having him as my QB3 in this class from a superflex perspective over a Kenny Pickett. So we'll see where the draft capital shakes out and how, thirsty some of these teams get for a quarterback. But I'm starting to like Sam Howell a lot for these dynasty leagues.
People are saying, and I think it's more of the NFL scouting industry, it was saying, Sam Howell took a step down his junior year. I don't really see that, man. The fact that
there was a time where Sam Howell was like, before the season, I want to say, he was like the guy. He was the guy that was going to be the #1 quarterback in the class, top 5 pick in the draft. And they had a rocky start. And I think that suppressed him. And it just wasn't what we thought. But we said it. They lost half their offense. Sorry to interrupt. But yeah, before the season, Sam Howell was the dude.
What more did they want to see from Sam Howell? Putting the team on his back, over 830 rushing yards. And we're not talking about a guy that runs like a 4.5 40-yard dash. We're not talking about a Malik Willis. We're not talking about a Lamar Jackson, Cam Newton. Like, that's not the player that he is. And you're seeing even in that highlight, trucking guys to get to the end zone.
Mm-hmm.
He put the team on his back. This is a guy that will find a way to make plays. That's something I would rather see if I'm putting myself in a GM's chair than some of the things that we saw from a super late breakout from Kenny Pickett that took him 5 years to have the big season. So I like the upside. Sam Howell, to me, he's my QB2 right now. I know this is a hot take, and draft capital is going to decide a lot of it. I'd rather have him in fantasy football over Pickett and Corral because he was able to do it right out of the gate. He's an early declare, so the NFL has told us, has at least told Sam Howell, that he's going to get the draft capital. He wouldn't have declared if he wasn't going to get drafted. So you add that in with how he was able to still produce with no weapons. There's a lot to like from this guy. I think the upside is there. And if I'm a GM, I want a guy on my team that will find a way to produce, even if my weaponry isn't the best, even if guys go out due to injury, whatever it may be at the pro level. That's what I'd like to see. And this is a guy who has a mix of, the different tools that we're talking about. 95th percentile college yards per attempt. He has a 91st percentile breakout age, broke out as a 19-year-old freshman, which you love to see. Again, breakout age doesn't necessarily correlate to quarterback production, but we just like to see guys produce earlier. It means there is a raw natural ability, a talent that they bring that will be more likely to translate to the next level. I hope he doesn't fall to like late second round. If these guys are similar, like the Pickett, Corral, Howell, if they're similar at all, I want Howell out of the group.
I agree.
Every single day.
I agree. All right, Steph, let's go ahead and talk about our next prospect on our list. We've got a couple more we're going to hit on today. It's Desmond Ritter out of Cincinnati. Desmond Ritter, I mean, this is the debate we get into every year. There's always one, right? Like the smaller school guy. This year we have a couple, but Desmond Ritter, 6'3", 207, had a solid season, but there's just questions about the competition. There's questions about how elite he can really be at the NFL level. So I think Desmond Ritter is one of these guys who a couple months ago, it was like, okay, he had a really good season at Cincinnati, but a lot of people were talking about him maybe as a second or third round pick, maybe even someone who falls to like the fourth round, one of those middle round guys that can be a good backup in the NFL. But now after the combine, after we've really started to see how explosive and how athletic Desmond Ritter is, people are saying he's one of these names that can sneak into the back of the first round. So with Desmond Ritter, Steph, I'm going to be interested to see draft capital with him, certainly. I know that's something we keep going back to time and time again, but Desmond Ritter is one of these names that draft capital is going to be really important because at the combine, he showed out. I mean, a 4.52 40-yard dash, his burst score was in the 94th percentile. So Ritter, to me, if an NFL team sees that and they see the recent meta in the league, that's like you have to have an athletic mobile quarterback and they trade into the back end of the first round to pick Ritter, that's going to be really telling for me. Now, as a prospect, I think at the end of the day, we say it like it's a combination of talent, a combination of landing spot, and a combination of draft capital. So Ritter's one of those names where even if he went early round 2 to like in Atlanta, like if the Atlanta Falcons drafted him to sit behind Matt Ryan for a year or two and then hand it over to him with Kyle Pitts, hopefully a good wide receiver, maybe Calvin Ridley's back at that point. Maybe he's not playing for Atlanta. We'll see what happens there. But Ritter is one of the prime names for me that probably is not going to be ready to play right away. But he's one of these guys that can come in, learn, sit behind one of these older quarterbacks. And in the 2023, maybe even the 2024 season could be the time where we finally give Desmond Ritter that shot and see what he has. So if I'm thinking about this from a Dynasty Superflex League, he's clearly behind these other four. I think there's another tier break after. I think it's Malik Willis at the top. It's Matt Corral, Kenny Pickett, and Sam Howell in another tier. And then I think there's a tier break, and it's Desmond Ritter, and even Carson Strong, who we'll talk about a little bit later. So Ritter is one of those names that I almost don't want to see him go to a place where he'll start right away. I know it's kind of crazy to say because time and time again, we see guys just seize those opportunities and run with it, like a Davis Mills from this past season. But I don't think it's a death sentence for Ritter if he goes to one of these teams with an older quarterback where you might actually get a discount on him in your leagues as well, because if he's not going to be the starter from day one, you're probably going to see him be one of those names in the mid to late second. And that's the kind of name that I'd be loving to take there in these leagues, because those are the names that can win you championships down the line, guys that people are sleeping on. You just have to wait for them to get that opportunity and show what they've got on the field.
Definitely a guy that I'd love to take a dart throw on in the third round of a rookie draft in a Superflex league for sure. Gives me flashbacks to that Kellen Mond, Kyle Trask.
Kellen Mond is the name I was thinking as well.
And Mond has to be the comparison just from how we should value him in fantasy football. Now, Mond was taken second in the third round. So this is a middle day 2 name. I think Desmond Ritter, based on the mocks, which I don't know, man. Jordan Love went first round. Like,
yeah.
Like, I don't know. One, like if we should even follow the draft capital with Desmond Ritter. I think he's going to actually be overdrafted just because of how soft this quarterback class is. He's not really a guy like I love or that I want. We got to put these quarterbacks in context of their Superflex dynasty value. Ritter he's the tools, right? He's the tools profile where he has the electric rushing. He did have a upper percentile QBR, 75th percentile. His college yards per attempt was mediocre. Didn't do anything crazy there, but he is an early declare. So the NFL likes him. And I view him as a Kellen Mond plus. If you like Kellen Mond, if you're a truth on Kellen Mond, I think you have to love Desmond Ritter because he was able to do it, granted not in the SEC like Kellen Mond did at Texas A&M, but had comparable numbers and then showed to be more athletic from his testing. So that's really how I view these guys. I don't have a ton of like hot takes on Desmond Ritter. These are third round dart throw names that we're talking about here at this point. And unfortunately, this next guy I want to talk about, I was really high on him, but it feels like the drum beat is fading. It really does. And that's one of the things that really matters when we're talking about values in your leagues, right? The drum beat is there for certain players like Drake London. Everyone's valuing Drake London. That's insulating the value of first round picks for 2022 because you're seeing the drum beat with guys. We're seeing the drum beat with Malik Willis. We're seeing whether it's just, narrative-based headlines that come out, whether it's Mike Tomlin couldn't stay away from Malik Willis at the Senior Bowl. Like these narratives come out and you start to feel that drum beat going. It feels like the drum beat has completely fallen off with Carson Strong, even though he's a guy that I love as a tools player because I think he has just pure who can throw the football the farthest, I think Carson Strong has the biggest arm in this class. Bigger than Malik Willis, more of a gunslinger than Kenny Pickett. Just talking purely how much of a punch his arm can pack. So he was a fun guy that I was really high on, but it seems like he's not going to get the draft capital. Probably going to be a late day 2 name based on the mocks that we're seeing right now. Kind of crushed some of the hype I had for him. I'm seeing 68th overall off the board for NFL mock draft database.
Yeah, and I think he's similar. I know we just talked about Desmond Ritter. He's similar in a lot of ways, but I'm definitely taking Ritter over Carson Strong. I mean, Strong is your classic. I mean, we talked about Ritter, one of these smaller school guys, but at the end of the day, like Cincinnati was playing on the biggest stage this year. So yeah, their competition was weak for most of those games. So we got to see them play against decent competition, and they were at least in the spotlight. Strong is the classic, like no one watched Nevada play a single game this year, especially us East Coasters, because it's way past my bedtime to watch their games. But just the monster numbers. He's not necessarily a big runner. I mean, looking at his rushing stats, negative 208 yards this past season, doesn't quite get it done. So from a mobility standpoint, he's not giving you that upside. But worth saying that in college, the sacks that you take count as negative rushing yards. So that definitely impacted him as well. But yeah, Carson Strong, we're seeing the drumbeat fade. And you see these guys like Malik Willis, who ironically is a small school guy who's getting the hype this year. You see these guys go to the Senior Bowl, they get into the combine, and that hype starts to rise. It's been really interesting with Strong. It's kind of been the opposite. It seems like it's been suppressed. It seems like these scouts are uncovering different pieces about his game that they're not as fond of, or he's just not standing out and impressing like we thought he would when he gets, side by side with some of these other guys, and they're really vetting their tape and vetting their skill sets. Looking at them like almost like A/B testing. Like when you put these guys up next to each other, it's a lot easier to see their strengths and their weaknesses. So Carson Strong, I think he is an interesting name. I think he is right in that same category of like a Kellen Mond, like someone who's going to come in and be a backup from day one. And if you want him to get a shot, you're going to have to wait on him. But ironically, like Kellen Mond was someone I was taking in the late second round last year. Looking back on it now, should have been an early third name. So you got to improve your process. You got to learn from those kind of things. Like those names are pretty tough to hit on. So I think with guys like Ritter, with guys like Carson Strong, I think I am with you, and I'm probably fading them back to that early third, anywhere from the 301 to the 306. We'll see where the draft capital lands for these guys and where the landing spots end up. But for these guys, yeah, I think it's just a third round flyer. And it's almost irresponsible to spend anything more on them for right now.
Yeah. And speaking of some of the landing spots, let's dive into those for a minute. I know we did some of that on our free agent show, but a lot of things have happened, right? We talked about the Russell Wilson deal, right? The Broncos were a team with that 9th overall draft pick. We thought they were going to quarterback there. Now Seattle has that pick. Maybe Seattle becomes a contender to take a Malik Willis 109. Could be really interesting for them. And we've talked about Indianapolis as well when we talk about that deal. So we can leave kind of Indy off to the side. I think if Indy were to go get I'm just going to make something up here, a Deshaun Watson, they become instant contenders. But there's no team's going to risk it with Deshaun Watson until everything's cleared out. So I don't even think it's worth talking about Deshaun Watson. Like we can talk about his value in the takes. Like we just saw him go, I think it was 3rd or 4th round in a Dynasty Superflex startup that we did. Shout out to the DMS Legends League and everybody in there rocking with us in the Discord channel. But one guy I want to talk about on a team that could be I'm seeing a lot of guys mock there, Kyle Trask. Kyle Trask, we talked about him last year in the draft process. Didn't really do anything sitting behind Tom Brady and Blaine Gabbert in Tampa Bay, but now Tampa Bay is wide open. They haven't really committed to the full rebuild yet. They tagged Chris Godwin, wanted to keep him around another year. They haven't sold off all their pieces at this time. We'll see where some of the names like Leonard Fournette, Ronald Jones go in free agency. I know they have a lot of pieces on defense that'll probably get moved around. But we saw Kyle Trask in his senior year have over 4,200 passing yards, 9.8 yards per attempt, which is a very high percentile. Let me spot check it here. Yeah, it's a 90th percentile college yards per attempt, so it was efficient. Had a 92nd percentile college QBR, so fits into this efficiency profile, this Baker Mayfield, Joe Burrow, Mac Jones type profile. Now he's not at the level of those guys, obviously, because he's not a starter, was drafted to be a backup from day one. Doesn't really do anything with his legs, but a 43-8 touchdown to interception ratio at Florida his senior year with Kyle Pitts, with Kadarius Toney, with a few other stud weapons there. What is your feeling on Kyle Trask? Is he worth stashing on the back of benches right now? Is he worth picking up deep when you're in these startups? Or do you think it's a guy that, Tampa's probably going to just move on from and try to find someone else to be the starter, like a Jimmy G, a Jared Goff?
Yeah, I think they had a plan in mind for him to be this successor of Tom Brady. And I think Tom Brady retired earlier than they thought he would. And that's kind of throwing a wrench in their entire plan. I thought they had 2-3 years of Brady left, and then it would be Trask time. And I think Trask isn't ready. They still have a contending roster. I think they were like, hey, we'll throw everything in and then we'll completely tear it down. We'll have Trask, which also doesn't really make sense to have him for 3 seasons because then he's coming up to the end of his rookie deal and you have to actually spend some money on the quarterback spot. But regardless, I do think Tampa's going to bring in a quarterback this year. I don't expect him to be the starter. And I think even if they bring in a temporary Band-Aid, a Jimmy Garoppolo type name, any of these guys we've been talking about, a Marcus Mariota, maybe they find a way to get a Kirk Cousins. Doesn't matter who it is. I think by the time that they're willing to move on from those veterans and compete, the roster is going to be in such shambles with so much dead cap space that it's just going to be time for them to move on and get someone other than Kyle Trask as their quarterback. So I'm not in on Trask. I think he's got a shot, certainly, if he finds opportunity on the field, just as a prospect. But I don't expect him to get that opportunity this season. And I don't know if it's going to happen next season either. And by that point, you're looking at just another one of these guys who could be a career backup. And that's the reality for most of these quarterbacks. So I'm not necessarily in on Trask right now. There's a lot of these other flyer names that I like in leagues, and this will be the time to do it before free agency starts, before more trades start flying around, like Mitch Trubisky, Marcus Mariota, Gardner Minshew, all names that we've thrown out there, that Jameis, all names that people are low on, people are out on, maybe even a Teddy Bridgewater that could be starters this season. Who knows? And a starting quarterback in a super flex league, if you can get them for pennies on the dollar, is worth something, especially guys like Trubisky, guys like Minshew, guys like Mariota, who actually have some upside when they're on the field as well.
So I think if we look at it from the weapons standpoint and the overall team build, Indianapolis, Pittsburgh, Tampa Bay, and I'll throw Carolina in there, probably the top landing spots. Yeah. Carolina does have those early picks as well. So kind of staying in the NFC South, Carolina, are they going to run it back with Darnold? Doesn't seem like it. They could be in the market for a QB. We've heard rumblings of them going after Deshaun Watson. Nothing's really come of that yet for obvious reasons, but that's a team with McCaffrey, DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson still there to be a fine role player. That offense we've seen, like when Cam Newton came back, was still able to keep it running, and he was fantasy viable with that rushing. How do you feel if a guy like Malik Willis goes to Carolina?
I'd love it. I think it'd be great. I don't know about for the weapons there, but I think for Willis, it would be fantastic. The problem is, I just don't want it to be a Jalen Hurts type of situation for the weapons. And sorry, I keep coming back to Hurts. I feel like Jalen Hurts, and I like Hurts from a fantasy perspective. I genuinely do. But I feel like this is the new Rojo versus Fournette debate on the show. It's just going to be, what is Jalen Hurts in fantasy? And it's a chicken or egg situation with Hurts. Is it did none of the pass catching weapons do anything because Hurts couldn't get them the football, or did Jalen Hurts struggle as a passer because he didn't have the weapons that he needed? So if he goes to Carolina for guys like DJ Moore, I know Robbie Anderson's been in some trade talks, but some of these weapons, I just think if Malik Willis is this Jalen Hurts plus, minus, or just even comp, no matter how you want to look at it, are these weapons going to struggle to get the ball from a raw passer running quarterback with a strong arm that tends to be a little bit inaccurate? And that's my worry. So for Willis, I think it would be great if, as the roster stands right now, they got CMC, they got DJ Moore, they got some pieces. They have a team that had Cam Newton there last season. Maybe they could even bring Cam Newton back to be a backup to Malik Willis and use that kind of scheme. So I think that's certainly interesting. So I think that's a good landing spot for Willis. I honestly don't think, for him himself as an asset, as a quarterback, there's a lot of spots that I'm unhappy with. But I think if I am one of these receivers on one of these teams, if I'm a DJ Moore owner in a dynasty league, I'm probably not rooting for Malik Willis to get drafted there. I'm probably rooting for a Kenny Pickett type name where they're just going to let him open up and throw the ball all around the field. Maybe even a Matt Corral. I think those would be 1 and 2 if you're going to look at the rookies exclusively, if you've got these pass catchers.
And wherever Malik Willis goes, we love himself, but he does present that downside for the weapons, the Lamar Jackson downside, where they're taking pass catching running backs out of the equation. They're limiting the overall pass volume. Same thing with Jalen Hurts. We're seeing that. Cam Newton did that every step of the way in his career. So we probably will see a similar thing to that with Malik Willis, where he's just sucking all of the pass attempts out of the offense, where he becomes really the only reliable fantasy asset. He'll have some boom bust names. We look at a Hollywood Brown. We look at a Devonta Smith. They can still have guys. Kelvin Benjamin put up over 1,000 yards early in his career with Cam Newton. So they can get it done, but you're not going to have a Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, one of these top producers coming out of that type of offense. That's something to keep in mind. If you're holding the bag, even with the DK Metcalf, you're like, I really hope they don't go Malik Willis with that 109 that they have now, because I want them to have a guy who's going to pass the ball a lot. And that's some of the downside. Now, staying in this NFC South, dude, this is wide open. It almost seems like Atlanta should just go from, hey, we might rebuild, into let's just contend because we can win this division that has so much quarterback uncertainty. Is Taysom Hill the guy? And I'm asking for a friend because I am going to be on the clock here in a minute in a super flex league where we're deep in this startup, and Taysom Hill is going to be on the board. Is there any chance Taysom Hill is New Orleans starter for part or all of 2022?
I don't think so. I think Taysom Hill was a Sean Payton exclusive. And now that Sean Payton's gone, I think Taysom Hill, his quarterback days are over. So for the Saints, I don't know, man. It's interesting that you bring up the NFC South, because you look at the quarterbacks and it's whoever Tampa's quarterback is kind of uncertain. The Saints uncertain. The Panthers uncertain. And then Matt Ryan. So one of these teams has to make the playoffs. It's going to be an ugly division, probably a lot of good defense being played in this division, which from a fantasy perspective doesn't excite us too much, but it is wide open. So I think we could see 3 new starters in the NFC South this year. And I think the fourth team, the Atlanta Falcons with Matt Ryan, could be a team that drafts one of these rookie quarterbacks we just talked about today. So a division to keep an eye on, next week with free agency opening up, guys like Trubisky, Jameis, and Mariota being on the open market. I think by this time next week, we're going to see a lot of these dominoes fall, and we're going to have plenty to talk about on next week's show. And I'm sure we'll get into some dynasty specific trades and things like that involving some of the player shakeups and the player moves as well.
Now, one more headline I want to throw out there that we haven't talked about, and I feel like it's kind of getting underreported from the fantasy community, even though everyone just was talking about it and it was getting memed on and getting dunked on. But Calvin Ridley with the year suspension, I'm seeing people move him for a 3rd-round pick in dynasty leagues right now. They're just like, I'll take whatever I can get. I'm out on Calvin Ridley because he's going to be now another year older. I was thinking that maybe he could appeal the year-long suspension, because it does seem pretty egregious to get a whole year for betting on just using FanDuel when he wasn't even on the field. It seems aggressive. The time doesn't necessarily fit the punishment, in my opinion. Is there a way that Ridley can appeal? Do you know anything about that, Alex? If he can appeal?
Yeah, he can appeal. So actually, I think his appeal window was within 3 days of, don't quote me on this, but I want to say it was within 3 days of when the suspension came out. So I haven't seen anything about it, but I think he can appeal. I don't know if he'll win. And I know it is what it is. It looks like it really wasn't anything excessive. It wasn't anything crazy, but I think this is just the NFL's way of saying hey, this is an absolute non-negotiable for the league. And just to remind people, you can't do this stuff. So whether he appeals or not, I don't think he's going to play in 2022. I don't expect that to happen. Certainly it's possible, but I wouldn't be banking on that. But he's 27 years old. He's not turning 28 till the end of the season. So, if he comes back fresh for 2023, he'll be 28 years old. Yes, he's coming off of 2 years of not playing. He's probably going to be on a new team. So you can't expect the Calvin Ridley of old to come back and just rinse and repeat as a guy who can be a top 10 receiver. But could he come back at age 28 and be a solid wide receiver too, be a Tyler Lockett type name that gives you boom weeks and gives you upside if he gets traded to a good situation? Absolutely. So people are acting like his career is over. I certainly think this is a huge hit for his fantasy value. But it seems like he wants to play based on some of the things he's been saying from his social media and things like that. It looks like he wants to be out there on the field, and he was going to be ready to come back this season. So if you can get Calvin Ridley for any 3rd-round pick, everyone stop what you're doing. open up your sleeper app and offer a 3rd-round pick to whoever has Calvin Ridley, maybe 2 3rd-round picks, and just see what happens. Because the hit rate on Calvin Ridley coming back at age 28, I'd still say is a lot higher than the hit rate of whoever you're taking in the 3rd round.
That's facts right there. And there's more clarity now for Atlanta about what they're going to do with their wide receiver situation. I doubt they're going to roll into the year with Kyle Pitts as their top receiving playmaker. They could be a prime landing spot for a Treylon Burks, for a Garrett Wilson. I think Garrett Wilson actually comps very similarly to a Calvin Ridley from a play style, skill set perspective. Not making that comp because that'd be pretty aggressive to throw out there of a guy who was wide receiver 4 in fantasy 2 years ago. But there's some clarity now. And whoever lands in Atlanta is going to be fun because now they're trying to go in for the division and they're going to have the only veteran QB in the NFC South as well. But Alex, I think that's it for today's show. I think we've exhausted all of the new topics, all the topics we're talking about. We don't need to talk about Aaron Rodgers going back to Green Bay, project the same season we projected him to always have. Anything else here before we sign off?
If you've been rocking with us, just hit that like button. Helps us out a lot. Also, join that Discord below. I mean, the offseason, things are changing so fast. I mean, the live streams are good for us to stay on top of everything. But, I mean, Khalil Mack got traded seconds before we started recording. So, join that Discord. Keep up with us. We're going to be talking Dynasty. A lot of good conversation in there about, trades. Like, we're reviewing picks versus players versus all sorts of things in there. So, like, you can always get a good point of view from Stef, from myself, from the community. And it helps us just keep that group think, that consensus mindset in these dynasty leagues. So we're not making too aggressive swings to one side or the other. So final plugs of today is join that Discord if you haven't done so already and buckle up because it's going to be a wild week in the NFL with free agency coming up. And I'm sure some more trades to break before we get through the end of the weekend.
Thank you all so much for listening and watching. We'll see you next time. Peace.
Peace.